The urban sprawl remains entombed in its pre-dawn stasis. This isn't the quiet of rest. It's the stillness of an existential vacuum, where the psyche's defense mechanisms finally start to fracture under the weight of the night shift. Not a peaceful dark. This is the density of cognitive inertia. A heavy, suffocating atmosphere that manifests when the distraction of the battler grind ceases and the raw self emerges from the shadows. The resonance of a distant freight train vibrates through the floorboards. He discards the leather armor of the laborer, shedding the industrial skin, but the psychological residue of the shift clings tighter than the dirt on his soles. 6:12 a.m. The microwave's digital pulse is a metronome for his quiet desperation. Each blink marks the erosion of his agency, a cold, mechanical witness to a life lived on the periphery of conscious intent. Thomas stands in the center of the flat, a high-vis ghost in the gloom. He doesn't reach for the light. In this sensory deprivation, he is finally forced to confront the internal feedback loop he's been running from all shift. 32 years old. Not just a chronological marker, but a decade of cumulative existential fatigue etched into the dermis. He is caught in a neurological stalemate, too physiologically depleted for the reprieve of sleep, too cognitively hollow to facilitate a single coherent thought. In this forced stillness, the ego's defenses crumble. He is finally awake enough to witness his own ontological drift, the quiet erosion of the self through the machinery of survival. Outside, the blue hour dissolves. The collective gears of the outer suburbs begin to churn, a ritualized performance of purpose, designed to drown out the void. The screech of the kettle, the rhythmic snap of plastic lunchboxes, the industrialization of domesticity, all of it serves as a distraction from the terrifying silence of being. And every day, he walked home in the opposite direction of the collective momentum, a metabolic mismatch against the morning rush, as if the structural integrity of the world was advancing, leaving him in a state of chronological suspension. He is the glitch in their transit, not through some grand cinematic collapse. There is no catastrophic rupture in the battler's psyche, just via the quiet entropy of the mundane, the slow burn erosion of the self-narrative one shift at a time. This is the ontological trap of adulthood, realizing that your routine isn't a ladder, it is a holding pattern for a soul you no longer recognize. The architecture of the self rarely undergoes a sudden demolition. You do not wake up one morning to find your psyche in ruins. Usually, it is a process of silent attrition, a micro-fracturing of your social contracts, a gradual desynchronization from the communal rhythm of the world. This is the onset of psychological atrophy. You aren't resting, you are fossilizing. The cessation of proactive agency begins with the small retreats. You weaponize the tomorrow fallacy, a cognitive bypass designed to avoid the friction of existence. It is a terminal delay of the spirit. Then comes the psychosomatic crash. You wake in the afternoon, the light mocking your inertia. You have slept, yet the ontological weight remains, heavier than before. This exhaustion wasn't a matter of physical fatigue. It was an ontological breach, a total collapse of the self-narrative. He wasn't just tired, he was existentially depleted, stuck in a feedback loop of hollow ritual. Thomas maintained high operational competence. He wasn't lazy, he was a battler in the truest, most tragic sense. He moved with a heavy, stoic precision, working harder than anyone else just to fuel his own disappearance. 6 nights a week, he surrendered his agency to the logistical abyss of the distribution center, a massive, sterile monolith of transit where millions of objects moved across the continent while he remained entirely static. He became a ghost in the surveillance machine, checking locked doors that led nowhere, monitoring screens that reflected nothing but the panoptic fatigue of a man who has forgotten how to look at himself. The fluorescent liminality of those endless hallways stripped the color from his skin and the marrow from his purpose. Under those flickering tubes, he looked half dead because, internally, the psychological atrophy was reaching its terminal phase. He wasn't failing, at least not by the metrics of the system. He was surviving, maintaining a low-voltage homeostasis that the world rewards with a weekly payslip. But survival is a form of neuroplastic stagnation. It carries a necrotic side effect. The more efficient you become at existing, the less capable you are of living. If you calibrate your soul to the monotonous rhythm of the night bus route for long enough, the very concept of a destination beyond the depot simply evaporates from your psyche. Hypermodernity facilitates this psychic atrophy. Today, total exhaustion doesn't manifest as a dramatic collapse. It presents as a quiet, compliant obedience to the algorithm. It is camouflaged by the mundane, the thermal delivery bag, the noise-canceling barrier of the AirPods. These are the modern sensory deprivation chambers of the broken battler. 3 hours of scrolling in a darkened bedroom. It's not rest. It's a liminal bypass. You are over-indexing on cheap dopamine to drown out the low-frequency hum of a life left unaddressed. This is the chronic arousal of a nervous system that never fully settles. You've conditioned your amygdala to find a false safety in the flicker, while your actual reality remains a static threat. Most people aren't destroyed by some singular, tragic catastrophe. They are slowly flattened by the sheer mechanical weight of repetition, a slow-motion attrition of the soul. Again tomorrow. The magnetic swipe of the card, the haptic vibration of the sensor, the ritual of the cog, validating a life of functional survival. Again, tomorrow. Thomas could feel the internal architecture of his purpose collapsing under the weight of the mundane. He could feel the erosion. It is always loudest in the pre-dawn silence. On the trudge back, the suburban facade fractures. He'd observe those apartment windows. Soft amber glows piercing the blue-gray dawn, the first tremors of the day shift's circadian rhythm. Synchronized domesticity. A father pressing a work shirt with practiced precision. A kid, glazed-eyed, hauling a backpack. The machinery of the mundane, operating in a different temporal dimension. Thomas halts. A stationary object in a world of kinetic purpose. These vignettes of normality aren't just distant, they are cognitively inaccessible. A profound proprioceptive dissonance takes hold. It's the voyeurism of the disenfranchised. He is witnessing a biological script he no longer possesses the neuroplasticity to perform, like observing another species through a reinforced glass partition. And in the silence of that sensory deprivation, a core-level cognition emerges. A thought so intrusive it bypasses every defensive mechanism he's built to survive the night. Maybe I'm disappearing. Not physically, psychologically. This is the onset of existential occlusion where your identity is cannibalized by the void of the routine. A few days later, his mother collapsed. A systemic failure. The body eventually refuses to subsidize the debt the mind has accrued through years of unrecognized trauma. Stress, the doctor said. Allostatic load had reached its critical threshold. Years of metabolic exhaustion masquerading as the Aussie battler spirit. Thomas held her fragile hand in his calloused one. This is the physical manifestation of intergenerational attrition. One hand built for the grind, the other broken by it. She looked smaller than he remembered. Decades of hard yaka etched into her skin like a map of missed opportunities. That frightened him more than the diagnosis, the realization that this entropy was his inheritance. Then she uttered a somatic truth, low frequency, stripped of artifice. It was the raw output of a spirit nearing its structural limit, not cinematic. Just the visceral reality of a life spent in service to the grind. Please, don't spend your whole life tired. 7 words that bypassed his cognitive filters and struck the very core of his existential occlusion. This wasn't just advice. It was a diagnostic report of his soul's erosion. And that directive lodged itself in the liminal space between his present ego and his potential self. It refused to be processed as mere data. As he crossed the threshold into the cold air, it became his new internal compass. Because tired had transitioned from a transient state to a permanent ontological identity. He wasn't merely experiencing fatigue, he was the living embodiment of systemic entropy. The magpie's call wasn't a song, but a witness to his stasis. A body manifesting physical decay. A mind drowning in psychological severance. A future that was nothing more than a recursive loop of exhaustion. This is the moment the battle realizes the battle is against himself. Before the first magpie warbles, Thomas stands in the interstitial void. The sky, a bruised indigo, oscillates between the graveyard shift and the morning's demand. He is suspended in the gap between what he was and what he must become. For a singular moment, the suburban drone ceases. No digital tether, no roar of the distribution center. Silence acts as a diagnostic mirror, reflecting the profound internal dissonance he's spent years suppressing through sheer grit. Then, the somatic realization takes root. His existence is a closed-loop system of attrition. He hasn't been building a legacy. He's been servicing a metabolic debt. Every free hour was merely emergency maintenance on a failing architecture. This wasn't leisure. It was physiological triage. Collapsing on the sofa in a vegetative stasis, the hum of the telly masking the hollowness. He wasn't living. He was perpetually recalibrating his nervous system just to survive the next 10-hour shift. In the biting pre-dawn air, the inquiry shifts. He stops chasing the hollow metrics of success, the extrinsic rewards for his exhaustion, and confronts the fundamental architecture of his days. He starts asking, what kind of life requires no escape, no cinematic montage, no crescendos, just the brutal friction of the 5 a.m. alarm, a granular decision to interrupt your psychological inertia, not for the performative hustle, for the existential audit. to sit with a cognitive static before the suburban roar begins. You see, discipline isn't a productivity metric. It is an act of confrontation, the long, cold gaze at the ontological dissonance between the man you are and the potential you have mortgaged, measuring the distance between your current utility and your latent intent. Zero exogenous validation, no dopamine spikes, just the iterative process of neural recalibration. By choosing the work, you are not just gaining skill, you are repairing a fractured nervous system. Eventually, the penance of discipline evolves into the architecture of self-respect. You stop running, you start inhabiting. While the world remains asleep, you finally wake up.